Now, the scripture we've read today from Luke chapter 8 is just perfect for our consideration today. It's about a woman in need, and of all the faith and courage she had to have to move out and touch Jesus, to give her life an opportunity to be transformed and changed. And that's the text that we look at today. If you think about all the barriers that she had to overcome just to make her way through the crowd and touch the hem of the cloak of Jesus. First of all, it was really forbidden by religious law for a woman to touch a man in public, much less Jesus, but any man. And she overcame that fear, overcame the stigma of doing something like that, made her way to Jesus. She had a bleeding disease. We're not sure exactly what it was, but it had been with her for 12 years. And in that day and time, it was understood that if you were sick, it was because you had sinned. It made it doubly impossible for her to touch Jesus, woman, but also a sinner. Embarrassed about her condition and life, she had to overcome a number of barriers to just move through the crowd, being an outcast person, to make her way to Jesus that day. But she did. And it wasn't as if Jesus was not busy. It's not like he was just nothing to do or that he was out on a Sunday stroll. Remember the first part of the lesson today. Jairus, a leader in the synagogue, had run to him and said, "My 12-year-old daughter is dying. I need your help." So he had important things to do to move to the home of Jairus that he might help a 12-year-old little girl. So it was an important mission on which Jesus was moving that day when he felt somebody touch him. And he paused and had time for this woman in the crowd. When nobody else could even sense that anything had happened, Jesus knew that something had happened. So in the midst of a busy experience with lots of obstacles to overcome, this woman made her way toward Jesus. Now maybe you can identify with that in your own life. What barriers are there that keep you from being a person who's able to move toward Jesus? What barriers are there in the church that perhaps are not as inviting as they ought to be for new people to come here and to feel welcomed and to find a place of service as a disciple of Jesus Christ in this church? Some of those things in this whole process, and especially today, we will look at and give you an opportunity to move beyond them. And best of all, let the past be the past and embrace whatever future God has for you and this church. This summer, there was a great event that happened that I paid attention to as a preacher. You may remember it in the late part of the summer. Diana Nyad, a former Olympic swimmer, had tried several times before to swim from Cuba to America and had never succeeded. Others had tried it. She was going to try it without assistance. She had a team there that helped her some, but just a person swimming in the water 100 miles from Cuba to Florida. She wanted to swim with no assistance, just hour after hour swimming. Now, she had been an Olympic swimmer, but she is 64 years old. I'm a little older than that, actually, but I remember when I was 64. I couldn't swim the length of the pool, I don't think, and she's swimming 100 miles in open water with sharks all around and jellyfish. What a wonderful metaphor for life. Swimming in the open waters, you never know when the sharks are coming, something that wants to bite your head off, or when the jellyfish may show up, just pesky little things that want to sting you. That's the way life is. We swim through treacherous waters, and sometimes we're bitten and sometimes we're stung, but we're called to keep moving. She made it 100 miles. She pulled herself up into the shallow water, walked ashore just completely exhausted onto the shores there in Florida, fielded the questions about how she could do such a thing on that day and in the days following. And she said all the things you should say. She said, I trained hard. I believed in myself. I thought I could do it. I had a great team behind me. All of those things were important. And then she said something that has stuck with me as an image that I want to lift up for you today. She said, every stroke I made, every time I reached forward my arm for another stroke, another swimming stroke, she said, as she pushed back the water, she said, I just thought, I'm pushing Cuba behind me. And when she reached out with her other arm, she said, I'm pulling Florida toward me. Pushing Cuba behind and pulling Florida toward her. It was her way to move forward in life. Now, that's a great image, even if it's just Cuba and America, putting Cuba behind and moving toward America. But if you let it be an individual metaphor, what are those things that you need to push behind you? Just let them go. And with every stroke, just push them back so that they're finally gone and just ripples in your wake behind you. And what is it that you need to move toward as you pull forward toward whatever God has called you to be? And not only in your individual life, but in your church. What do you need to put behind you? With every stroke, just let it be. Let the past be the past. And pull toward the future, whatever that is. You have a great opportunity in this community with this wonderful facility, with the great staff that you have here and the music program. They've been so inspiring to me today to hear the music, with the commitment that you bring to it, with your location in this area. You have a great opportunity to be a wonderful church for the people who live in this area. If you can push the past behind you and pull forward to whatever is ahead. It's a great image. I hope you'll hold on to it. It's been meaningful to me in my own life. William Mule is a preaching professor at Yale Divinity School. That is, he helps prepare young preachers for the ministry, helps teach them how to preach and be ready to pastor a congregation. And I read in a magazine that I get not long ago that the first thing he says to those preachers in his class, would-be preachers ready to launch out onto the world and save the world and bring great changes and so many high hopes, the first thing he says to them is, always remember that most of the people that you look out on Sunday morning almost decided not to come that day. What an interesting thing to reflect upon. Maybe that's true in your life. It's been true about people I've known through the years. Almost decided not to come. Too many barriers, too many other things to do. We live in a busy world today. You could be doing 100 other things this morning. You could be getting ready for the football game. You could be out enjoying this, perhaps one of our last warmer days before cooler weather comes. You could be tending to things around the house. You could be taking care of things that you've put off for a while. You could have gone to some other church today. There could have been lots of reasons why you almost decided not to come. But you're here. And if that is in any sense true about your own situation, maybe you just feel out of sorts, or you're crossways with somebody, didn't feel like you ought to come to church some Sunday. If in any sense you identify with that, think how much it is more so for someone who visits here, for someone who's never been to church here, who finally musters up the courage to come to a strange place, to look in the faces of people they don't know, with who knows what going on in their lives, with what kind of circumstances they are living, with realities that they face every day, to have an act of courage, to make their way to church, to almost decide not to come and then to come. How important it is when that person comes to your church that you respond, this should go without saying, as Jesus responded. That is, you are aware of their presence. In the midst of the crowd, you're aware they're here. You are welcoming. You have a healing presence about you, even as Jesus did. It's our calling. That's what it means to be church. What it means to be church is for people to make their way to Jesus and to in that process, find healing. One way or another, I guess that's why we're all here. We're here because we've made our way to Jesus, and we've been healed, or we're in the process of being healed, or we hope healing will come, or we're still looking and searching. But we've made our way to Jesus. We've overcome all those obstacles, and we've touched the cloak of Jesus. It's what it means to be the church, to allow people to come to Jesus and touch the cloak of Jesus, and for us, like Jesus, to be aware that they're there and have about us, in our worship experience, in the words that we say, in the handshakes, in the hugs, and the smiles, in the listening ear, whatever it might be, to let someone know that they've been in the presence of someone who cares. It's our calling as church, and we're called indeed to be that kind of church today. What does it mean for you in your own life to put something behind you and to move forward to where God may be calling you? The gospel story is great today. It's about two almost hopeless situations. A 12-year-old girl is dying. How sad is that? How sad is that? How desperate the father must have been to come to Jesus when he had tried perhaps everything else himself and say, my daughter needs you. It's a desperate situation, almost hopeless. And Jesus drops everything and starts to go. But along the way, the woman in the crowd got his attention when nobody else even knew she was there. Jesus was aware of her presence and delayed long enough to help her. Two hopeless situations. A little girl who's dying, in fact, does die. When Jesus delays, the girl passes away. And the woman, a bleeding disorder for 12 years. It said in the text she'd spent everything she had to try to get help, and nobody could help her. So she made her way, overcame all the obstacles, touched the hem of Jesus in the crowd that day. And the first word Jesus says to her when she acknowledges that it was her, and she looks up into his eyes, fearful and trembling and crying, he said to her, your faith has made you well. Well, what a strong word that is. I mean, he could have said, I healed you, which in a sense, of course, is true at one level. But what he said to her was, your faith has made you well. What a strong word that is for all of us. It is your faith that leads you forward. It is your faith that causes you to be able to put the past behind you and to move ahead toward where God is leading you. And when Jesus gets to the home, finally, when the little girl has died, his word to the people standing there is, do not be afraid, only believe. Another good word. Do not be afraid. Whatever the future holds, do not be afraid. Only believe. Someone has counted how many times the words do not be afraid or do not fear are in the Bible. Do you know how many it is? Some of you have probably heard this. 365. That is one for every day of the year. You can find in the Bible somewhere where it says, do not be afraid. I think there's something we should hear about that. Whatever the future holds, do not be afraid, only believe. It's interesting that in the story today, the women are not named. The little 12-year-old girl doesn't have a name as far as we know. And the woman who was desperate with the disorder for 12 years is never named. We know Jairus. We know Jesus. Peter's mentioned by name. But the women are not named. Just people in the crowd. But Jesus cared. One was a child of luxury, a child of means, the daughter of the leader of the synagogue. One was destitute, a sinner, and an outcast. And Jesus had time for both of them. That's who we should be as church also. In the beginning, your faith has made you well. In the end, do not be afraid. Only believe. And Jesus, of course, if we'd read the passage further, raises the little girl to new life. That which was hopeless was given new hope. A desperate woman, and that which had died lives again. Could there be a better phrase for any of us? Could there be more hope for any of us in our own lives or in our churches than that kind of experience? So, this day, in a few moments at the end of our service, you will be given the opportunity to acknowledge those things that you want to let be part of the past and to move forward to where God may be leading you and to a new future for you and for your church. There'll be special music now, and I ask you to prepare your hearts for the process that will follow, which is a time of prayer and repentance.